take on the darkness, stare down deceit. Murder in the headlines, justice in the beat. From cold case whispers to killers in disguise, we rip off the mask, expose all the lies. Facts like bullets reload and deliver. Truth cuts deep like a blade in a river. Corruption shakes when the mic goes live. We dig where others won't survive. Games rolling through the smoke. Truth hits hard, no time for a joke. Deceit, murder, we name every name. No restraint, no shame, just flame. Locked on the case, we investigate.
This is 12 Gauge Investigative. Let's jump
you'll ever need 12 Gauge Investigate. We make them bleed. No games, no censors, just truth. Justice is loud, and we're the sound. This is 12 Gauge Investigative.
All right. All right. How's everybody doing tonight? My name is 12 Gauge. Welcome to my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. Sorry for being a little late. I was out doing my my real job. I don't know what's up with this. Why my picture's so small. But anyways, hope everybody's doing all right tonight. Let me know what's going on with you. Anybody ever heard of this book by Mr. BRUCATO? It's called The New Evil. I've been reading this book for a while, and I've taken a little time to be reading the other book. So I've kind of slacked off on this one. To my people on X watching this, welcome. Feel free to come in here and chat if you like. I'm here scarfing down some Whataburger. I don't know if they have Whataburger where you guys are at. But if they don't, you're definitely missing out. You really are. See, I don't know what the difference in. See, that one's bigger. I don't know. It's all good, whatever. So I'm gonna start reading this. I left off talking about Elizabeth Smart. And if y'all don't know about that case, then maybe y'all might need to go and look into it, because I believe it's a good one. I don't have a lot of information on the Elizabeth Smart case, but you know, and a lot of people were talking about that at one point in time. Now we're going to talk about another case, and it's the even more famous case of Joseph Fritzl, also in Austria, involved keeping his eldest daughter in a bunker beneath his house for 24 years, there to sire 7 children by incest in addition to the 7 he sired to his wife upstairs. Others have kept their sex slaves locked up in their house for long periods, as was the case with Philip Garotto, who kept Joyce DeGard for 18 years and had 2 daughters by her before the 3 were able to escape his grip. The families of these victims assumed their children were dead. They were legally dead, i.e., missing beyond 7 years. Several years ago, it came to light that in Cleveland, Ohio, Ariel Castro had kept 3 women captive, each for approximately a decade, shut up in his house before their escape in 2013. Though these men have taken narcissism, and entitlement to dizzying heights, seldom encountered in peacetime prior to the era of the new evil, they were not all identical in personality. Some were ruthless, arrogant psychopaths such as Fritzl and Mitchell. Some were weak, unself-confident men who could never earn the loyalty and devotion of a sexual partner through socially acceptable means, as in the cases of Pricklopel and Esposito, and some like Castro and Hose were selfish brutes. What we're witnessing is Kidnap with a new and ugly twist. A related new and ugly twist is seen in a contemporary brand of extortion, in which a wealthy person is abducted, bound, and tortured till the credit card or other financial information is revealed, allowing the abductor to steal large sum of money. Unlike kidnap of a child for ransom, this is a type of sophisticated kidnap or robbery. And a gregarious example is that of Noel Doorball and Peter Lugo in Miami in 1995. Lugo was the brains of the group. Doorball was the muscle. They and their accomplices, dressed as respectable businessmen, would lure rich executives with promises of profitable deals. During the second encounter, the Mark would be tied up at gunpoint and tortured by having parts of his body burned till he revealed critical numbers, code to a safe, and so forth. Once the monies were in the hands of the extortionists, the victims would be killed and dismembered, their body parts dumped in various oil drums around Miami. Later in 2007, I spoke with Doorball on Florida death row to request an interview for a Discovery Channel television program. He proved his con artist credential once again. He insisted I could not interview him unless the station first gave him a check for $1,000 for his daughter, which we did, only to discover that he did not have a daughter, and he declined to be interviewed. What is new in the Lugo and Doorbell case is not the extortion. There has always been extortion. What is new is the brazenness of the robber, the sophisticated use of modern money transferring mechanisms, and the barbaric schemes to then murder and disappear the victims. Such schemes have long been familiar to us from stories connected with the mafia and other organized groups, but were until recently rarely done by amateurs and men acting alone. So this next group is going to be what Brian Koberger is. I've identified this to you guys, and I want you to know that this is the category in which Mr. Brian is categorized in: mass murder. The FBI did not officially define mass murder, but in the 1980s, the Bureau established the description as 4 or more victims slain in one event in one location. This does not include the perpetrator when suicide follows the killing. As noted earlier, in 2012, Congress defined mass killing to mean 3 or more killings in a single incident. In my research on the topic, I used the FBI description and also include Mark with Asterisk episode of which fewer than 4 persons were murdered, but where the intention to claim many victims was unmistakable, foiled only by the poor marksmanship and or death of the assailant. From books, magazines, and newspapers, I have collected 328 examples of mass murder between 1900 and May of 2018, the time of this writing. 256 in the United States and 72 from other countries. This figure represents about a fourth of the mass murders mentioned in various internet sources from around the world, most of which provide only the barest of details. If we narrow our sight just to America, cases that meet the pre-2012 criterion of 4 or more casualties, excluding the perpetrators, and those from sources in which information is offered in greater detail, we wind up with 229 cases in my series. These are shown along the upper line by decade. In the following graph, clearly mass murder has been on the rise since 1970. The lower line indicates mass killings that involve the use of semi-automatic weapons, which is also markedly on the rise since 1970. Because of the dramatic nature of a mass murder, public attention is drawn to such crimes much more to random murders of 1 or 2 people in a store robbery or violent family dispute. In reality, mass murder is a rare event. The death toll, lately about 160 per year in the U.S., represents only about 1% of the gun murders in America per year. Rarer still are mass murders committed by men with autistic spectrum disorders, such as what we used to be called Asperger's syndrome. 3 of the worst and most high-profile mass murderers responsible for the combined deaths of 67 people were said to have the conditions of this sort. Sung Hu Cho, 2007, Adam Lanza, 2012, and Elliot Rodger, 2014. This led the public to suspect that autistic persons were at high risk for such violence, which they are not. What is new via mass murder and pertinent to our discussion of new evil is the phenomenon of school shootings, to which we have dedicated an entire chapter later in this volume. Cho, Lanza, and Rodger will be discussed in detail when we arrive on the topic. Mass murder is in general an explosive reaction to an unbearable humiliation, sometimes spur of the moment, but more often planned, well in advance. Being fired from a job is one common stimulus. Being rejected by a lover or spouse is another. Mass murder is almost the exclusive preserve of males. 97% of the perpetrators are men. The rampant drug abuse from the mid-1960s till today has been a factor in some examples of mass murders, by the way of further destabilizing already mentally disturbed individuals, and also diminishing the capacity for self-restraint. A case in point is that of Jared Loeffner in Arizona, who attempted to kill U.S. Representative Gabrielle Giffords in a mass shooting in 2011. She barely survived while 6 other bystanders died. Loeffner, 22 at the time, had been jilted at 14 by a girlfriend. He became unhinged and began abusing marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, and amphetamines, and a host of other psychoactive drugs. He may have had a genetic vulnerability to mental illness to begin with. There were some bipolar relatives, but he rapidly became paranoid and delusional about big government and about Giffords in particular. Loeffner has been called schizophrenic. in the press, but his was a drug-induced schizophreniform psychosis in which he became progressively more unhinged and bizarre in his thinking. In some cases of mass murder, the accelerant substance is the more traditional one of alcohol, as in the case of Wade Page, the Wisconsin neo-Nazi who in 2012, after being fired from his job due to drinking and jilted even more by his neo-Nazi girlfriend because of his abusive behavior, entered a Sikh temple and killed 6 worshippers and then himself. Murder with extreme sadism. Murders with uncommon degrees of brutality and depravity have been common in situations of warfare or other forms of intergroup conflict since ancient times. Police are familiar with murders committed in states of rage since these typically show signs of overkill, i.e., the use of more than ordinary force or more numerous blows that are required to bring about death. Consider the example of Susan Wright. Her husband had cheated on her repeatedly, had given her a sexually transmitted disease, and was physically abusive. In 2004, when he finally pushed too far, she stabbed him 193 times. What appears to be occurring more frequently in the current era of murders, accompanied by the acts of extreme cruelty, are else devious measures to avoid detection of a kind rarely encountered before the mid-1960s. How's everybody doing tonight? Is everybody doing all right? The 1974 murders in Utah by Dale Pierre and William Andrews are an example. These men held up 2 clerks and 3 customers in a hi-fi record shop in what began as an armed robbery, but they proceeded to tie up the victims and force them to drink Drano, a corrosive lye-containing cleanser which caused enormous blisters and burned their tongues and their throats. Pierre raped an 18-year-old woman for half an hour as she choked on the liquid before he shot her in the back of the head. 2 other captives were killed. One man who survived both shooting and strangulation had a pin shoved through his ear. Pierre stomped on it until it punctured the victim's eardrum and came out of his throat. The 3 who died were lucky, in a sense. The survivors endured years of agony from mouth and esophagus injuries. These are pretty violent indeed. I'm doing pretty good. I just got back from a transport, 3 hours worth of working already for the next week. I don't know what's up with my lighting tonight. It's like I had it pretty good, and then now it's like all dim and crap. Anyways, regardless, whatever. The 1965 murder in Indianapolis of 15-year-old Sylvia Likens was in some ways more horrific than the Utah murder because of the prolonged torture she endured from Gertrude Banishewski, the woman entrusted with her care. While Likens' parents were away for several months, Likens was considered prettier than Banishewski's daughters. This aroused considerable envy, dealt with via the systemic brutalization of the young girl. Banishewski and her daughters would strike Likens with a board, force her to eat feces and drink urine, burn her skin with cigarettes, dump her in the bath of scalding water, and brand her abdomen with hot needles, spelling out the message, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." They then locked Likens in a room, leaving her without food for a week, such that she died the day that the parents returned from Florida. The Likens case can be understood as an extreme example of harsh treatment of a child who is not the biological offspring. of a parent. Adoptees are at greater risk for maltreatment. Adoptive fathers are about 7 times more likely to molest an adopted daughter sexually than are fathers of their own biological daughters. Likewise, child murder is much more common where there is no blood relationship between the parent and the child, or even in common law as opposed to legitimate, legally sanctioned marriages. There are exceptions. Teresa Knorr, for example, was morbidly envious of her daughters. In the mid-1980s, she starved to death her daughter Sheila, whom she had earlier forced into prostitution, by chaining her to a pipe in a closet. A second daughter, Susan, was doused with gasoline and burned alive. Then there are aforementioned diabolically clever means employed by killers to escape detection. Bill Skipper in Louisiana, an illiterate and bigoted thug, was befriended by a sympathetic black neighbor, Jenora Gilroy, who had a good job and was much better off than Skipper and his family. She would give them money for groceries and diapers. In 2000, thinking Gilroy's dog had hurt Skipper's pet goat, Skipper and his buddy bludgeoned Gilroy to death and raped her necrophilically. To throw the police off the scent, Skipper then went into town and forced the black man at gunpoint to masturbate into a cup. Returning to the corpse, Skipper tossed the sperm over Gilroy's body so that the DNA would suggest a black perpetrator rather than a white one, which did delay the detection of the real killer for quite some time. Another example of a brilliant but even more repugnant plot to escape detection was that of a famous Brazilian soccer goalie, Bruno Fernandes. Besides his wife, he had a mistress, Eliza Samudio, whom he impregnated. He insisted she have an abortion, but she refused and had the child. Immediately after, Fernandez strangled her and, with the help of his wife and cousin, dismembered the body and fed the pieces to 10 Rottweiler dogs so as to eliminate all traces of the body. So far as we know, this is the first in the era of new narcissism, feeding one's mistress to dogs. Fernandez would have evaded justice had not his cousin, in a pang of conscience, something quite lacking in Fernandez, confessed to the police. Wow, that's interesting. He fed his mistress to a pack of Rottweilers. What do y'all think about that? Isn't that pretty methodical and evil? I would say so. I would say so. Wow. Paraphilias of extreme nature. The list of paraphilias, a concept we have previously defined, is a very long and far exceeds the more innocuous ones, such as voyeurism and foot fetishes. These are more dangerous, or on the more dangerous side, such as cannibalism, necrophilia, sexual sadism, and asphyxiophilia, have long histories as well. Sexual sadism, arousal, and orgasm during a murder, is common among men committing serial sexual homicide. There are even 2 women who exhibited this paraphilia. Neither one of them are the part of the new evil era. The 16th century Hungarian countess Erzsébet Bathory used to press her body against the bodies of virgin girls, whose bellies she split open with knives, experiencing orgasm before bathing in the blood of the virgins as a kind of elixir to sustain her beauty. Nurse Jane Toppin in late 19th century Boston also used to experience orgasm when killing her victims. In a new era of evil, we encounter several men, the preponderance of paraphilics are male, who showed either unusual twists to well-known perversions or else sexual aberrations never described before. Graham Couch in England, for example, was a salesman in his 30s when in 2003 disappeared. Jane Longhurst, a teacher of similar age, Couch had several paraphilias, including violent pornography, drilling holes in the bathroom walls so he could peek at women, and an obsession with asphyxia via strangulation. While he was masturbating to orgasm, as he was pulling on the ligature around Longhurst's neck, and perhaps distracted by his own activities, he discovered that she had expired. So far, we are not in new territory. What is new is that he then kept her body in a shed and then in a box at a storage depot for 5 weeks, visiting her remains regularly for necrophilic sex until they began to decompose. They were then taken to a wooded area and burned. There have not been many cases of prolonged necrophilia until our era, one of the most prominent ones being that of serial killer Dennis Nilsen, also from England, whose 16 victims between 1978 and 1983 were kept following strangulation in his apartment, partly for necrophilic sex, until the bodies grew rank. And somebody was asking the other day if Brian Koberger was looking at necrophilia, pornography. And if that is true, or if that's found out, that would bring in a whole different dynamic. It would bring in a whole different dynamic for sure. A more bizarre, perhaps even unique case is that of ex-Navy SEAL Ben Striff and his wife Erica in 1999. They lured another couple to their place in Maryland. Ben forced the couple to strip, killed and decapitated both, and then had sex with the head of the woman. We have as yet no name for such a paraphilia. Ben also engaged in bondage and cannibalism. As to the latter, he urged Erica to cook the dead husband's leg in order to eat it. Whether she indulged his cannibalistic fantasy in this way is not clear from the records. Rape with the modern element. Throughout history, women have always been vulnerable to rape. We read in Deuteronomy 20:25-29, for example, that if a man seizes and lies with a young woman who is betrothed, his crime is punishable by death. If the woman were not betrothed, then the man must pay the father 50 shekels of silver and marry her, and never divorce her. Roman Emperor Caligula was notorious for sadistic rape. In 12th century England, King Henry II, who instituted common law and the 12-man jury system, was enraged when the Catholic Church forbade him to punish a Worcestershire cleric who had raped a girl and then knifed her father. The Church insisted that the clergy could not be tried only by much more lenient canon law, which would only defrock such a cleric, not execute him. It was this dispute that led to the falling out between Henry II and Thomas Becket. These are, of course, only a few examples of the long and terrible history of rape and sexual assault. With the invention and commercialization of the typewriter in the 1860s, many poor women who earlier had little choice but to become prostitutes now earn their livelihood as typists. It was no longer so easy for a man to have his way with a working girl. In reaction, rape became more common. In the last century, rape in the U.S. was recorded more often, suggesting a significant increase beginning in the mid 1960s. The following graph shows the total number of reported forcible rapes in the U.S. by decade between 1960 and 2017. As noted earlier in this book, these numbers indicate a decline since the 1990s, just as we observed in the number of active serial killers by decade. It is not clear whether or not, to what extent, the period of the 1960s through 1990s saw a true increase in incidents, or is it better accounted for by a greater willingness on the part of the woman, thanks to the feminist revolution of the 1960s, to come forward and make the authorities aware that they had been victims of rape. The natures of the sexual violation did not seem to differ from those of rapes committed earlier, except for those perpetrated by men committing several sexual homicide. Serial killers, discussed at length earlier, and in additional detail to come, serial killers often were extremely violent and degrading toward their victims in a manner reminiscent to the extreme brutality of rapes perpetrated during the wartime, such as those perpetrated by Japanese soldiers against Chinese women in Nanking in 1937, which is but one of all too numerous examples. In the last, I think you skipped a line. Mike and I named the offense in this book. I did? Oh, sorry about that. In the last 50 years, however, there have been a number of rapes by men in peacetime with details so sensationalistic and far-fetched that they had been imagined by a novelist, a reviewer would have rejected them. Surely the most implausible but nonetheless real story was that of Canada's Luke Magnotta, which was not his real name. He was born Eric Clinton Newman. Magnotta is to narcissism, which he has carried to unimaginable heights, what the Rolls Royce is in the world of cars. At 21, he began appearing in pornographic films, also working at times as a male stripper and escort, impersonating a woman. He ran up large debts on false credit cards. His first brush with fame, I'll bet local, came with his putting out YouTube videos he had made in 2011 of suffocating and killing kittens, as well as one showing a kitten being eaten by a Burmese python, thereby igniting the wrath of animal rights groups. True fame, this time international, did not come till a year later. After an evening of sex with an acquaintance, Chinese exchange student Lin Jun, Magnotta filmed himself stabbing the man to death with an ice pick, followed by necrophilia. This was a prelude to the real fame Magnotta earned by dismembering the corpse and mailing pieces to various political organizations and schools throughout Canada. The left foot to the Conservative Party, the right foot to a school in Vancouver, the torso to one part of Montreal, the head to another, and so forth. Suspicion by now had fallen on Magnotta. He fled to Germany, where he was finally arrested in an act of narcissism never to be outdone, watching news of his own crimes on the screen in an internet cafe. Equally breathtaking in depravity, if less novelistic in detail, are a number of other rape cases in the new era. In 2012, Travis Forbes, who acknowledged convincingly deep down, "I am evil," sexually assaulted Lydia Tillman in Colorado. He then strangled her, shattered her jaw, poured bleach on her body, and set fire to her apartment. Somehow she managed to survive, though with lasting injuries. The year before, he had raped and killed a woman of 19, burying her in a shallow grave. Wow. A worse fate awaited 8-year-old Robbie Middleton in Texas, who in 1998 was raped by Donald Collins. After the assault, Collins tied the boy to a tree and poured gasoline over him, setting him afire. The child survived, terribly disfigured, with numerous hospitalizations and grafts, finally dying of his wounds when he was 21. He was able to name his attacker, who is now in prison for life. Just reading these just gives you, I don't know about you, but it gives me the sense of how evil people really are in this world. I mean, just reading this stuff, it's like, whoa, whoa. In all of these cases, it is the agony suffered by the victims because of the subsequent acts of depravity, over the above, the pain, the humiliation of rape itself, that demarcates rape in the era of the new evil from the rapes of earlier times. In 2005, the pedophile rapist John Evander Cowie sneaked into the home of 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford in Florida and raped her once in the evening and again the following morning. He then put her in a garbage bag and buried her alive in a shallow grave where she suffocated before she could claw her way out. It is no tribute to our justice system that Cooey raped a girl years earlier when he was 20. He was sentenced to 10 years but paroled after only 2, following which he raped still another girl and was again released prematurely. After the rape and murder of Lunsford, he was given the death penalty, dying of cancer in prison in 2009. If Mr. Brucato was here, I would ask him, does he believe that rapists could be rehabilitated, such as this case right here? This individual seemed to have been given chances. He paroled out, then he raped again. So it makes me wonder if Dr. Brucato believes that rapists can be rehabilitated. I don't know how that's possible, but I've always wondered that, especially after reading this. Um, where am I? A shocking element of the rape and murder of 8-year-old Victoria Stafford in Ontario is the fact that the killer, Michael Rafferty, was assisted by a female accomplice, Terry McClintock. After the latter lured the girl into their car with the promise of showing her a nice dog, an interesting choice given that McClintock once killed a dog by cooking it in a microwave. Wow. Rafferty proceeded to rape the girl repeatedly, after which McClintock bludgeoned her to death with a claw hammer, and Rafferty had her purchased beforehand. Wow. Wow. Sadism. It says aggressive behavior will more often be found in men, thanks in no small measure to their higher testosterone titers. This may also relate to the smaller size of the male orbitofrontal cortex, a brain area that observes inhibition of aggressive impulses. Likewise, men tend to, on average, to be less empathic in the sense of compassion rather than basic ability to understand the emotional states of others than are women. Similarly, the propensity to inflict pain and suffering on others and the actual enjoyment of doing so, key ingredients of sadism, is more male than female phenomenon. I see no difference in the level of institutional sadism committed by kings, dictators, armies, rebel leaders, and so forth at any time in history. Some countries have become more civilized over time, others less so. I think Dr. Bricato's in here. Oh, there you are. Hi, Dr. Bricato. It depends on the subtype of the rapist. Okay. There are 4 subtypes. All right. Well, that's interesting to know because I've always wondered that. If it's actually a situation that can be overcame, if it's more um, pleasure versus impulse. But maybe we can talk about that one day. Um, where am I? Okay, it says become more civilized over time, others less so. England and France no longer. I don't think this is where I was at. Okay, some countries have become more civilized over time, others less so. England and France no longer subject dissidents to the tortures endured by the Welsh Prince Daffod under Edward I in 1283 or by Jacques de Molay and his Templars when punished for heresy by Philip IV in France, who in reality simply wanted their money. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, the date of atrocity would give rise to our squeamishness about Friday the 13th. We have seen the systemic torture of the leftists in Juan Perón's Argentina. Saddam Hussein ordering that the hands of dissident writers be dissolved in sulfuric acid, and more recently, the Islamic State torturing and beheading infidels with different views, and so on. Sadism has, of course, relevant excuse me, to the acts of certain criminals during peacetime, and this too has a long history. We believe that in the past 50 years, however, we have witnessed a number of sadistic crimes of a sort that were exceedingly rare in earlier times. Some have already been discussed, such as those by Noel Dorbel, Teresa Knorr, Dale Pierre, and Jessica Schwartz. The section that follows deals with serial killers for whom sexual sadism is a default position. There are several post-1965 examples of extreme sadism that do not fall easily within the categories outlined here, and that strike us as more atrocious and depraved than what we would almost never encounter in the annals of peacetime crime from earlier eras. Here are 2 examples. In Kirtland, Ohio in 1989, Jeff Lundgren, a breakaway Mormon cult leader of a band of some 24 followers, arranged for the execution of all 5 members of the Avery family. I remember hearing about this. They had been followers originally, but became suspicious when he demanded all their money, and when they began to realize that rather than being a prophet who spoke with God, he was a con artist who hid his avarice and lust for power behind a facade and religious specialness. Lundgren had some of his loyal followers lead the Averys one by one to a barn where they were then shot to death by Lundgren. Soon after, the troop fled the state where Lundgren, bored with his wife Alice, carried on sexually with the wives of several other adherents. When Alice voiced objections, he punished her by wrapping his own feces around his penis and forcing her to fillet him. The other case concerns Sedley Alley, whose crime could have been included in our discussion of rape, but who demonstrated sadistic elements so extreme as to merit placement in this section. It was alleged that in 1982, Alley killed his wife by drowning her in the bathtub after she filed for divorce. The evidence was not quite strong enough for a conviction, so he evaded punishment. 3 years later, in 1985, he came upon a woman of 19, Suzanne Collins, who was about to graduate from the U.S. Marine Aviation School in Virginia. As she was jogging through a park near the school on the evening before graduation, Allie abducted her and took her to a nearby park. He then beat her repeatedly, fracturing her skull before thrusting a yard-long, inch-and-a-half thick tree limb through her vagina 4 times. The limb passed through the abdomen, puncturing a lung and killing her. In Allie's macabre imitation of physical rape, adding insult to the most grievous of injuries, it took the twists and turns of justice 22 years before the death penalty could be carried out. 3 years longer, as author John Douglas and Mark Alshaker wrote, than the victim had lived. I think I had heard about the Avery case. I really do. It sounds familiar. And that last one was really a bad deal. The reason for the assault is fantasy or personality is likely to be repeated. Okay. See anger and power. So you are enjoying what I'm reading, right? Let Dr. BRUCATO know that you're enjoying his writing because he's the man that wrote this for sure. Him and Michael Stone. Power assertive rapists use sex to express power. Power reassurance rapists uses sex to express power. So now we're going to talk about serial sexual homicide. And this I've always wondered about Koberger. I really have. If this is going to talk about what I think it's going to talk about, I've always wondered if Koberger fit this narrative right here or this kind of um, discussion of serial sexual homicide. We noted earlier in the volume that there is more than one form of serial killing, but we again emphasize if serial sexual homicide by men is what people ordinarily reference when using the term serial killer. This will be the focus here rather than on the hospital personnel who poison a string of patients, mothers who smother one infant after another, and so on. Serial killers, in the narrow sense used here, the angel of death murderers, for the most part, share one trait in common. Namely, they relish the godlike power they exert over other people, contributing to the narcissisticality oriented thrill of elevating themselves, if only transiently, far above the socially inferior status that characterizes their Quintonian existences. So, based on what I just read there, do you believe that that could be Koberger? You think that that could be Koberger? Serial killers of the type involved in sexual homicide are all male. The phenomenon was beginning to be recognized and described in the late 19th century, around the time rape in general appeared to be on the increase. A few such cases were described under the heading of lust murder by Richard von Krafft Ebing in Germany, 1881. The most widely known case in the U.S. during this period was that of Herman Mudgett, also known as H. H. Holmes, the New Hampshire-born doctor who built a torture establishment disguised as a pharmacy in Chicago. After luring young women there, he raped and tortured them to death, later dissolving their bodies in lye. Whereas many serial killers are loners, schizoid psychopaths with poor capacities for intimacy, Mudgett was a psychopath with enough superficial charm to lead a double life. He maintained 3 marriages in different cities, each wife regarding him as a devoted husband who had to be away a lot due to his work as a traveling salesman. Finally caught and executed in 1896, Mudgett was one of just a small number of serial killers identified in America per decade. Until we arrived in the 1960s, earlier in this volume we reviewed statistical findings from Radford, Florida Gulf Coast University serial killer database, which demonstrated that the number of serial killers of all types active in America by decade began to increase significantly in the 1960s. Serial killers note that the killer's year of activities are listed according to the decades in which they were first active. Both the Radford SGCU database and I observe a decline in the number of American serial killers since the 1990s. Note that the low tally for 2010 to 2018 is likely because true crime biographies have not yet been written about several other serial killers first active during this period. It says serial killers in the U.S. whose biographies have been published in True Crime Monograph by decade, 1890 to 2018. So we start 1890 to 1899. There were three of them. 1900 to 1909, one. 1910 to 1919, zero. 1920 to 1929, there was three. 1939 or 1930 to 1939, one. 1940, 1949, zero. 1950, 1959, one. 1960, 1969, 12. 1970 to 1979, 40. 1980 to 1989, 42. 1990 to 1999, 22. 2000, 2009, 17. 2010 to 2018, 4. So let me see how we're doing with time. Okay. I think I'm going to stop right there because I want what I read to soak in a little bit to you guys. That way you have a little bit of time to assimilate what was read. Um, and we do understand that the murders do occur. We do understand that. And we have also kind of understood that the Koberger was a mass murderer. This is something that we had discussed. And I had heard Dr. Brucato speak on one of his shows that he believed that Brian, if he was going to put him on the new evil scale, would have been a number 16. So, I mean, it. You guys need to go out and buy this book. You really do. Buy it on Amazon, buy it on Kindle, buy it and read it because it does describe a lot of what we talk about on this true crime channel because it's very knowledgeable in the fact that it diagrams things that aren't readily acceptable to the mainstream media or any other kind of information just you know that you can get just anywhere, you know what I mean? So if you do get a chance to get this book, I suggest that you get it because me reading it is one thing, but you reading it and being able to articulate what's being read, totally two different things. Kind of like when I read while Idaho slept. I read that, right? So reading it gave me a new impression of exactly what the case was all about. And that's awesome that you two have that book. It's awesome that you do. Hopefully more people will be invested in the book as well as the newer books that Dr. Brucato finishes up and obviously puts out there. I really enjoy his presentations and the way that he articulates his words. It's enjoyable to read. It's not so astronomically difficult that you need a dictionary to be able to look up every word or whatever. So, Dr. Brucato, if you're still listening, thank you so much for writing this book, and hopefully, I'm doing it justice by reading it audibly. Um, and we're really enjoying this, and hope that you know that. Um, because it's been a while since I've read this on this book. Um, but also because I've been, fixated on other things. I'm going to try to get back to reading more on it. That way we can complete it to be able to have a general understanding as crimes come about. So thank you so much for those of you that were in here, and hope to see you again soon. Be on the lookout. Be sure to click the notification bell so that whenever I do go live, you guys can be notified, and you will be able to be in the live. Once again, I'll see you soon. Dr. Brucato, take care of yourself and be safe out there. The rest of you as well. Maestro, cue that music. Whoa.